Okay, so the presentations are made, so we're not doing it again. We are presenting the reforestation and afforestation subject with our group. To begin with, just a kind of introduction. We know that there is a general concern about forests by the public, the general public, when there are, like, for instance, wildfires in Amazonia or in Australia. We see a media coverage of the event. So it's interesting to see that there is this feeling of the importance of the forest. But we would like to know what science says about this, about the importance of forest and the importance to protect it. So we will cover during this talk a first general aspect of the nature-based solution, which is reforestation and afforestation. And we will try to focus really on one case study, which is the Green for Green project in China. And finally, we've just proposed a study that we constructed on the same case study in China. Okay, so I will do a survey of the NBS. It will be kind of similar to what we had this morning. So it will be just a reminder for you. I will go fast on it, but the idea is that NBS built upon the notion of ecosystem services that was created by scientists in the 70s, then developed in the 80s, in the 90s, until the Millennium for Ecosystem Assessment in 2003, which was the real beginning of the political interest into those ecosystem services, which corresponds to an evaluation of the socio-economic value of the functions of the ecosystems and their interest for human societies. So you got here the document that came out from the MEA, the Millennium for Ecosystem Assessment, and the purpose was to educate people, to make them aware that biodiversity of ecosystems are necessary for a good supply of those services. And this ecosystem assessment was here to get the private sector, the decision makers, involved in the actions to preserve and to protect the environment and those ecosystem services. So ecosystem services are really based on an economic valuation of the processes. So you put a value of money in terms of money on the processes, and you estimate the cost that society would pay if the service would disappear. So this is a real economical evaluation. So NBS, during the 2010s decade, wanted to focus more on the environment itself and on the people itself, rather than just an economic evaluation. That is why this notion of nature-based solution came, and that was based on different topics and evaluation, with a real interest on human well-being and biodiversity benefits. The idea is to use those ecosystem functions to protect and restore the ecosystem functions that are essential to societies. So science took the subject that was defined by the IUCN, and we tried to differentiate different types of NBS. And Anne will go for a detail of the different types.
Yes, so the three types of NBS, then they tried to make them account of how much engineering biodiversity and ecosystem we can have from NBS in the x-axis, and then in the two y-axis it's about the many number of services and stakeholders that involved in the NBS. It also what kind of services that can deliver by this kind of NBS. So by this we can have three types. One is using existing NBS, but like existing ecosystem, but not just do some minimum change or not do any change at all. So that's a first time. The second part is to have a NBS and do a change, but just to make it sustainable and have a multifunction. And the third time, it's about having new ecosystem like NBS. So we have some examples for each time. But what we have to remember is that we can shift the two y-axis. So it's not type 1 is better than type 3. It's really the three types are complementary. Because if we switch the y-axis in the left side to the right side, we can feel that it's changed. So we need to remember it's not because one is more important than the other one, but they are complementary.
Moving on to the different forms of NBS and the targets that we are going to consider, and all of us who are going to present today and tomorrow. So I'll just give a brief overview. We discussed how there are different types, but NBS can be implemented in the form of biofuels, where biomass can be converted to fuels which are renewable. And then there are rooftop gardens and green infrastructure projects, which are mostly coming up in the urban areas these days. Then there is forestry, which we are going to focus upon today. So these different targets, the 6 components, are not disconnected. They're all interrelated to each other. For example, if we talk about pollution, and if an NBS focuses on diminishing the amount of NOx, SOx, or PM particulate matter, then it would also lead to change of climate and the global warming. Similarly, we talk about food security. So these are a mixture of socio-economic and environmental components. So we cannot really differentiate if land degradation would just lead to the degradation of land and not impact the people as such. So therefore, while implementation of NBS, both socio-economic and environmental aspects need to be considered. So what motivates the policymakers to implement such projects? A lot of people in the world are dependent on the ecosystem services provided by the forest, and it is because of the degradation of these land covers that motivates the policymakers and funding agencies to pursue such projects. And therefore, it becomes important to understand how different stakeholders need to be managed while such a decision is implemented. This is the most crucial aspect of NBS, of afforestation and reforestation, because these are the processes which are important to be considered when we talk about the ecosystem services provided by trees. So, for example, if we consider evapotranspiration, this is not just one process, but it is also impacted by many biophysical factors, the albedo effect, the clouds, as well as the groundwater. So, the evapotranspiration is also connected to the soil and the processes which happen. So, trees, with the help of their roots, they retain water, and it helps in preventing soil erosion. Also, in places where there is scarcity of water, it helps in the recharge of groundwater. Also, the nutrient cycling is important because the fertility of the soil is affected, and therefore a lot of projects which are implemented take into consideration these factors when they are implemented in water scarce or arid or dry region. Another important factor in the implementation of such projects is the timber production, which has motivated a lot of reforestation projects, and mostly it also leads to degradation sometimes, but there has to be a balance and trade-off to understand which services we need to consider more and which services we can let go of. Then temperature control and air pollutant deposition. So we'll see in our further evaluation of our case study how afforestation projects can lead to surface cooling and sometimes even warming, and it depends both on the weather conditions as well as the latitude and longitude of the implementation. Yeah, I think that's good.
So we have seen that trees and forest ecosystems can provide a lot of ecosystem services, and so this is why there is a willing by decision makers and general public to protect and restore sometimes the forest. We see a lot of programs of reforestation, of afforestation. So it is legitimate to wonder if they are efficient, if they are justified in terms of science. So you have the example of the Great Green Wall initiative in the Sahel. You got a lot of companies, private companies, that implement policies of one product bought, one planted tree. You have also concerns about potential greenwashing by companies just funding a reforestation project, maybe without a real scientific interest. So this is why we wanted to go deeper in this question of nature-based solution of reforestation and afforestation, understand the outcomes of those kind of solutions implemented. So let's begin with some definitions given.
So what are the two terms that we are talking about, and we will develop a little? It's reforestation and afforestation. So we want it to be clear first, even if we think that you know what are they, but we wanted to present you the definitions of we found in the Kyoto Protocol and in the Article 3. That reforestation it's more about putting trees where there have already been trees, and then it's the fact that place that was forested before but that has been converted to non-forest land. Then for afforestation, it's mostly about convert a place that didn't have forest before or didn't have forest like for at least 50 years. So that's the two terms that we are talking about. We will keep going to understand better, and we choose that a case study based on the Green for Green project on China. That is why we are going to be involved in this part.
Okay, so now we are going really to focus on one example, a case study, so in China. So what is the context of this situation? So we are in the 60s, 70s. China has deforested a lot of its forest cover during the beginning of the industrialization of China. If you know a little bit about China history, in the 60s it was a big economic development. And so several problems came out from this deforestation. And the problems are today the desertification, for instance. So as you may see, there is in Mongolia, if you know, the Gobi Desert, and you got problem of degradation of land because of intense land use and deforestation, which create an erosion of the soil, and because of the wind, it comes toward the east, and it goes into the direction of Beijing, very big cities in China. And so you can see events like this with the sandstorms that covers the city during one day, creating a lot of problems, economic problems and social problems. So in order to fight against this tendency of desertification and sandstorm and land degradation, Chinese government decided to install a very large afforestation program called Green for Grain, but it has actually a lot of names, a lot of different names to mitigate this desertification. So this is the context. It began in the 60s, but actually the program really began in 2002, like in 1998, it was beginning to be implemented until today. And it was manifested by large areas of trees planted, sometimes monoculture forest, sometimes not, on the slope of the hills, or sometimes in semi-arid areas. And the idea was to convert back the crops toward forest. So in the 60s, they cut the forest to put crops. Now they gave money to farmers to leave the crops and to plant trees and to go work in the cities, for instance. So it is a huge program because 28 million of hectares of land were converted back or afforested into forest land. It is the biggest afforestation program in the world. It can correspond to approximately 30% of planted trees in the world during a time. So very interesting in terms of outcomes, effect, because potential very big outcomes on global scale and local scale metrics. So this is just a map to show you that it's over all China, but we are going to focus maybe more on the BTH region, which is around Beijing, around Hebei region. And so you can see that you got from 2000 big years of implementation, and actually it has continued in 2012 for another 8 years. And as you may see, 28 million corresponds to a large share of the bond challenge. The bond challenge is the UN challenge towards a large reforestation and afforestation target by 2030 for all the countries in the world. Okay, so now let's go deeper in the papers, in the study, in the science.
We'll now evaluate the different targets that we mentioned before and how the afforestation projects in China have realized those targets or not realized, or have there been some outcomes which are not expected. So firstly, this is about water balance, and this project, this research paper talks about the water balance in the area of the whole area of China actually, and they have found through 7 different evapotranspiration models that when you compare the afforestation to the natural vegetation, if you simulate the area to allow the natural vegetation to grow, actually afforested plants consume more water, and it is through the different processes of evapotranspiration and precipitation that they have come to realize that planted trees consumed more water in 2011, approximately 46% more when compared to natural vegetation, which consumes about just 8.2. And this is very crucial for a water scarce country like China, which also includes developing countries like India, which do not have enough water availability for the people. So as I mentioned, the socio-economic factors continue to interact with environmental factors when such projects are considered. Then, yeah, the next one. Okay, now Anne will talk about the soil water content.
Yes, to keep going with the soil water content, in this paper they have they compared cropland with a plantation that they call the sequestration. So for these two, we see that in the both ecosystem are decreasing in terms of soil water content, but we can ask why the cropland are also decreasing. But in this time, it had the precipitation, annual precipitation was decreasing, and also because they intensify their production and they use a lot of fertilizer, so the crop was the biomass for the crop was kind of bigger. So that's why for the cropland it's also decreased. But for the Koshinsky plantation, it's decreased because they have a deeper root, and they can also go in the deep layer 22 meters, and that's called the desiccation in the topsoil also in the deep layer. So what we can conclude here is like afforestation have a bigger impact on the soil moisture content compared to cropland. So next, we will compare the effect of the soil water content in different watershed, and when we are in different watershed, and the watershed is the different color that we have here, and then at first we have a decreasing in the soil water content, then in the first 9 years they have a decreasing of the water content, and also it still in decrease from 9 years to 15 years. Then after that, it kind of start to increase. So what we say here is that when we first have implemented an afforestation in some place, that it has a big impact on the soil water content, that it decreased for the first years, but at long we see that it start to increase again. So here we will see that the impact of such project on the food security. Here we still have the Green for Green project. So from 1999 to 2003, in this place, they have already afforested 2 million hectares. So 60% was a cultivated land, and 40% of was a bare land that they convert to afforestation project. So here we have all the land, but they have made an index to see that the distribution of the cropland before, and this index they use data GIS database, and then based on rainfall, climatic condition, and the condition of the soil, they make the index to, and they saw that only a really small percentage was on the 4, in the index 4, and then 0.55% on the cropland was higher than 9 in the index. So they see that the land that was converted to forest, that it's a land that doesn't really have a good index. So in the second part, they control the productivity for the forest compared to land without the Green for Green program. So for the cultivated land with the Green for Green program, when they compare them with the cultivated land without Green for Green program, they show that for the Green for Green program, it have a below productivity when compared to the Green for Green program.
Next, there is a very interesting paper about air quality in the BTH region in China. And before talking about the maps here, I would like to talk how they implemented it and what were the effects that were observed. So, afforestation was done in the northwest and north region of China, which is a hilly area, and therefore the trees actually change the surface roughness, due to which the northerly and northwesterly winds which come towards Beijing and the BTH region, they were obstructed. So this is mainly the effect of surface roughness, and due to this, as you see in the map on the left, that the particulate matter concentration is highly increased in this region because the trees were planted around here, and the particulate matter has low concentration here. And this map shows the percentage of the concentration increase, and the most increase is in the southeastern region of BTH. So this helps us understand how while after implementation there can be some effects which might have been ignored or might not have been properly understood. This is also important because this is the picture of 18th January 2014. So it's not unless there are winds that the surface roughness actually matters, because only when there is a huge gust of wind, this effect is observed. Also, the paper analyzed if there could be a ventilation corridor which could prevent this from happening, but they found that even if there was a ventilation corridor available to allow the winds to pass through, this could not have been avoided. So this is the situation about Beijing, which is the capital region of China.
So in terms of carbon sequestration, we have a graph that shows the net ecosystem productivity and production. So for this, we see that at the beginning, when we implement a first project, we can have a negative MEP, net ecosystem production, and then that means that we can have a carbon source. And then at the end, we can have an increase, so it's become a carbon sink, and then a long time, it can be stable. So the carbon can be neutral, so that we can have a limit in this kind of project, because in time, in terms of carbon sequestration, we can have a different result, and after a long time, it just stays stable. So in the second graph is just to show that the most important carbon sequestration is in the biomass, and then like 97%, and it's a small amount is in the soil carbon. So we see that the carbon storage due to afforestation evolves qualitatively and quantitatively with time. So, if in terms of erosion and runoff, we have a graph that illustrates the runoff. We see that in the beginning, the runoff can keep increase slightly, and that's due to the conversion, the first conversion. And when we keep doing the project across the area, so the runoff is decreasing. And in the study, they conclude that runoff is not really only linked to afforested area, because it can also link to the natural climatic condition, also if there is human activities. That's why we cannot only describe by the afforestation situation. But for the soil erosion, it's obvious that there is a decrease with the project. So for soil erosion, they found that afforestation is it decreased with forest coverage. So it's have a good impact, as much that we have afforested area and the soil erosion are decreased.
Another research paper studies the effect of surface of afforestation on the cooling of the surface. So this becomes important after considering different processes that happen at the surface. So one of the processes is albedo, the albedo effect, because forests have lower albedo than grasslands and croplands. This is important to consider how when we replace the grasslands and croplands with forests, how the effect will turn out to be in terms of temperature. Also, afforestation in the boreal regions and in tropical regions, the effect is understood quite well, but in the temperate regions like in China, the effect is not very well understood. So in this, this is just a pixel, 40 by 40 pixel of a region in China, but the effects were around 90 to 95% similar all over the country. So as you see, the blue region in the left map is the planted forest, and during the daytime, it was a surface cooling effect, but in the night time it was an overall surface warming effect. And if you talk about the daytime, the effects are more of radiation, because the trees absorb more solar radiation, and therefore the surface cooling is mostly because of the evapotranspiration, because it's increased. And at night, the storage of the radiation in the plants and the cloud that is formed due to the evapotranspiration of the day makes the night warmer, because there is no evapotranspiration during the night. So this is important to see how the daytime temperature was increased in the higher latitudes when they moved up the country. So it was warmer in the north, but colder in the south. Now, Anne is going to talk about some other ecosystem services like flood mitigation.
Yes, we also access some regulating services, and when they compare the two periods from 2000 and 2015, they saw that with the project that there is a really increase in those services. Like for flood mitigation, it's increased like 59%, and for the other like carbon storage, it's really go high. So we also that do some scenarios, and then in the two scenarios also they found the first scenarios PCS is like they convert the steep slope pyramid more than 50 degrees. So they found that in this it has a better impact on the soil retention. So if we have to improve the soil retention, it's better to operate in this kind of slope. And for the PRC, they convert requirement from farmland, like close in a buffer area of 30 meters. So they saw that it's good also for soil retention and also for water purification. But for the carbon storage, like the two scenarios are indifferent. It's the same result for the two scenarios. So we have a high improvement of the regulating services in the under the Green for Green program.
In terms of biodiversity, there have been studies which have found that when afforestation is done on a degraded land, then it leads to a positive effect. But as compared to a naturally regenerated ecosystem or natural vegetation, the impact is not the same, and we cannot achieve similar levels of biodiversity. So we find that a more integrated study is needed to conserve biodiversity. And now we'll move on to the proposal, and Thibault will talk about it.
Okay, so now a proposal study. So proposal is a big word. It will be more of a proposition of what could be done in the case of afforestation in a heavy region. Thank you. We propose to study the effect of fragmentation on biodiversity and the effect of potential reconnection of patches by afforested forest cover. So the context is that a study revealed the effect of fragmentation of habitats in China, and we know that fragmentation of habitat is likely to cause biodiversity loss by shrinking the populations and by preventing from the genetic fluxes that are essential for a proper adaptation of the species. So here you got two examples, and it reveals that the fragmentation can be very different according to the situation. Here it's a dam that has been built and that has created those little islands. So it's really like a real famous case study of fragmentation. And here it's a fragmentation due to afforestation. So this is what interested us. So the paper says that fragmentation of afforestation can create barriers between natural patches of forest, because the afforested forest is not a really good connector between the patches of natural native forest. So this is what we are going to talk about. So this is a scheme proposed in the paper I just showed to you, with the patches and with, in orange, afforested forests. And so they say that, so I don't know if you can see properly the colors, but you got dark green and lighter green. Lighter green is naturally recovered forest or ecosystem restoration, and in orange it's just afforestation of low biodiversity forest. And so they say that afforestation is not a good way to connect the natural patches, and this is what we're going to implement and study. So here, it's a satellite picture of what it looks like from above. We got natural patches here and afforested dotted forest here. So in the following scheme, we propose to actually study the biodiversity in native forest patches, where they are connected or not by new afforested forest. So you may see here like 4 different conditions. Here you got a patch that has been connected with other patches with afforested forest. Here a patch alone, a patch that has not been connected with other patches, but that has been extended with afforested forest or naturally regenerated forest. And here a patch that has been connected naturally to other patches. So you got 4 different conditions, and we will do some survey of biodiversity, maybe with DNA barcoding and some statistical analysis on the different measure sites, in order to compare the effect of potential reconnection on the biodiversity. So what kind of results we can expect under different hypotheses. So if afforested forest is not a good connector for patches, and if connection is important for biodiversity recovery, we can expect that the patch C will be the one with a good recovery of biodiversity, but the patch B, because of the link with afforested forest, will not be able to have a good biodiversity recovery. However, if the type of forest doesn't matter, and that what matters is just connection with any kind of trees, in this case, maybe all the situation here, the B and C, will be able to display a recovery of biodiversity. And finally, in the context of connection between patches doesn't matter, but only the area of forest, so only the patches with new forest will have a biodiversity increase, and the patches that stay small don't have a biodiversity increase. So those just are some hypotheses we made and some potential results, but we don't really know what it will do. And we have to find actually the good setup and the good site to perform this study. So this is everything we wanted to show to you. Let's conclude with some key points and take-home messages. The forest is a crucial provider of ecosystem services and a powerful nature-based solution, because in an ecosystem, forest is very important. But so the first point is to avoid deforestation. Whatever you do, the best is not to destroy before thinking to restore. So avoid destroying. When the forest is deteriorated, you can think about implementing reforestation or natural regeneration if well managed. And in the worst scenario, you can consider afforestation, but as we saw, it has to be done under specific conditions with a careful evaluation of impact, as we saw with problem with water shortage, problem with connections of fragmented habitats. And finally, ecosystem services that are evaluated are relational and contingent values. So it means that it is difficult to say this is positive, this is negative. it depends on who you are talking to, because some people will have interest in some ecosystems, some people will not. For some people, forest is good. For some people, it prevents them from their business, for instance. So to find a trade-off in any NBS project is really complicated. That is why a multidisciplinary and an integrative approach is necessary in any NBS implementation, and an evaluation of the effects at short-term and long-term should be done every time, because it is not possible to interfere on ecosystem without any impact, because we don't master every component of the ecosystem, and science does not know how works all the ecosystem in the world, and science cannot predict what the species will do in any situation. So thank you for your attention. We have the references of the different papers we mentioned before, if you want to take a look later, and the references of the rest of the paper we talked about. And if you have questions, feel free to ask. Thank you a lot.
Thank you.
So the idea is that we keep the question for later, because we are going to introduce Nicolas Métro and Yohann Fare from Kinomé. They will present their work, and then we will have a joint discussion, come back to your work, to what you say, and try to organize a discussion with Kinomé, us, and okay. Thank you so much. So please. Oui, alors attends, moi, je vais à un moment, je vais tenter comment on peut faire ça. Alors, en fait, il y a aussi une possibilité de partager un nouvelle de la présentation. Donc, dès que vous êtes sur le lien, je ferai le transfert. En fait, si mais nous, sur un centre de recherche. Ouais, sinon, on a fait pour la vidéo. C'est ce que je veux dire, c'est Kinomé. Alors, on va peut-être charger la vidéo maintenant. Comme ça sera prêt, et puis on va vous montrer comment. Là, tu le. Attends, si tu veux que je le fasse, pendant que tu commences, Nicolas. Ok. Tu viens avec moi, on va charger les vidéos. Je vois. On a un retour d'habitude. Nicolas, tu te présentes un petit peu. Ouais. Parce que je suis pas sûr. Okay. While we are, can I remove my mask while I'm here? Ouais, je pense que c'est bien. Yeah. Good morning again to everybody. Before anything else, I would like to congratulate our three friends who just presented, who will come back to it, and I'm in no way making a judgment of their work, but it's impressive how much you covered in so little time and how global your vision is of things. So I would like to congratulate you. What we will do now in the next 40 minutes with my colleague Yohann is to focus on the human side, and I will come back to it. So just to introduce myself, I'm Nicolas Métro. I'm the founder of Kinomé, which is a social business which I started 15 years ago in 2005. with an objective of leveraging, using nature and trees in particular to improve the life of human beings in order, in that logical order, in order to put an end to deforestation and biodiversity collapse in the end. Really focusing on how nature can help us help nature, as it were. It's in practical terms, Kinomé is doing 4 activities, which I will present in a minute: research, action research, expertise, consulting, projects, and education. And we have brought all of these activities under the same roof because we believe that they are all essential to shifting a paradigm. And Kinomé is not about tree planting, it's about changing the way we relate ourselves, human beings, to nature and therefore to ourselves. So I will present what Kinomé is about shortly. Then we'll present you an example of a nature-based solution, which is about mangroves in West Africa. And then my colleague Yohann will present our work on the cocoa value chain and its relationship with biodiversity, especially in West Africa, but also in Latin America. Our thesis, our point this morning, is that we believe, as I alluded to earlier, that the human factor is by far the single most important key success factor in any nature-based solution. Of course, nature-based solutions aim at protecting, sustainably managing, and restoring ecosystems. So they assume, and they're right in doing so, that all forms of life are connected, including human beings. That's at the core of the approach, and we fully subscribe to that. But we believe, as I said earlier, that we need to start from human beings if we want to have a chance to change their behaviors and therefore to impact ecosystems. And this is because we could see it in your presentation, because changing, improving, protecting ecosystems takes time. It takes time. And you can see that depending on whether you look at the first 3 years, for example, or the next 3 years or the next 10 years, the result of your analysis actually sometimes is contrary. Because trees take time to grow, because water takes time to regenerate, and so on. So we need to buy time. And the way to buy time is to improve the needs of people in as short a term as possible to change their behavior as quickly as possible. And so that's going to be our thesis, and that means that we need to start bottom up, and then to consolidate into gradually increasing landscapes. And that's not easy. We were discussing that a bit earlier with some of you, because each specific landscape has its differences, its idiosyncrasies, and the people have their differences in idiosyncrasies. But as you will see later, we all have, at the end of the day, the same basic needs, the same fundamental needs. And if we connect these needs, which are expressed differently by different people, but are at the end of the day the same basic needs, if we connect these needs, we can have a large-scale change, because we can build common ground. That's the meaning of human-centric, nature-based solutions, which is our topic. So, which button do I press?
On the mouse. Yeah. Wow. There is a row.
Can I use this?
Yeah, this one. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. So this I covered. So we started 15 years ago from basically what has been discussed this morning. Deforestation is actually, unfortunately, not stopping. Far from that. It has actually picked up in the last 3 years. And if you add bushfires and other things like permafrost melting, it actually explodes at the moment. So we haven't cracked the nut yet. We haven't managed to put an end to deforestation. And that's the reason why we wake up every morning, to see how we can crack the nut, how we can shift the paradigm. Because planting trees, we've seen it in your presentation, will not suffice. You know, we have to protect what remains, and we have to find ways to change the human behavior at large scale. And that's the same for the ocean, by the way. Okay, so I'm getting used to it. Just like trees, people need time to adapt. So it's all about a mindset shift. The biggest reason why forests have disappeared is that human beings have decided that they were not profitable enough and that there were more valuable things to put instead. And that's, you know, soya or cattle in Brazil, then that's palm oil in Indonesia, and that's firewood or charcoal in Africa. And with all of that, you've got 90% of world deforestation. So it's an issue of land use. The term is proper. So how can we change that? We can change that by building a better proposition for human beings with trees and forests. In order to do that, we need to understand better how trees can help us. That's what research is aiming at. Then we need to influence decision makers, big corporations or big governments and institutions at the highest possible level. But we need to do that while being closely linked with the reality of the field. And that's what often lacks in our big conferences and our big workshops, that there are nice strategies, and they're actually relevant strategies, but they're very often disconnected from the reality of the field. So we're trying to connect that. In order to be linked with the field, we have our own projects, and we also coordinate, provide technical assistance and other things to existing projects. That's the third activity. And the last, but not least activity, is to share all of that. You know, all of these first three activities are specialist activities. They're like business to business, as it were, if you talk business. And the last one is business to consumer. It's not an expert job. It's really a sharing, communication, training job. And in order to change a generation, which is what we need now, to change the behavior of all human beings, we also need education. So our job is to say to the kids, actually bringing kids to forests here in France and in different parts of the world, have them put their hands in the soil and discover that dirt is not dirty, that earthworms are key to our life, that it's pleasurable to discover forests, that it changes our lives, and also that they do not need to wait till they are adults to change the world. So that's buying time. If we wait till 8-year-old or 10-year-old kids become our age, it's going to be too late. So that's the reason why we do education. We brought 25,000 kids to the forest in the last 10 years to do that. Starting here in France, for example, in the land region. We're just doing this yesterday, for example. So these are the 4 activities. We do nothing alone. We work in partnerships with research institutes, universities. When it comes to research, we work with experts, with also research institutes. When it comes to consulting, we join forces with different consulting firms. And for projects, we work with NGOs, we work with local groups, with cooperatives, women groups. We work as much as we can with women, because they actually better equipped or have a higher awareness of the need to change the world. And for education, we work with governments and NGOs. So none of that we do ourselves. And we specialize on different things that are provided by forests and trees. Climate, biodiversity, nutrition, sustainable value chains. It could be water, but it's going to be for later. We cannot do everything. We have focused on things that were actually top on the agenda of people when we were talking to the people in the field. That's why nutrition came up. That's why value chains came up, with employment, with economic value. And that all combined aims to change the paradigm, to shift the paradigm, the system. Learning again. Here we go. In 15 years, we have directly planted 6.5 million trees, but frankly, this is not what matters. What matters is the influence, the positive impact on 1.1 million lives. Because this 1.1 million lives in 30 countries, they will be the changing factor in ecosystem restoration, protection, and sustainable management. We know who these people are, and we can explain, I'll do that in a minute, how we have improved their needs, improved their lives. So we work, as I said, both with the private and public sector, with small and large institutions, with for-profit and non-profit. And our business model, we are a social business, so we don't rely on subsidies or grants, but we funnel the subsidies or grants that we manage to collect to our local partners, and we work with them as a team. The basic concept beyond everything we do is that if I want to change the world, it's Gandhi who said that, I need to change myself. It's like being a parent. I mean, kids don't do what you say, kids do what you do, and you do well. So our belief is that development is founded or is only possible if people have the awareness that they can improve their lives themselves, and that they can offer to their neighbors and kids a better life. That means that they need to be aware that they have value. And in order to make them aware that they have value, the best thing is to start with ourselves, to understand that all of us, all human beings, have an infinite potential of creativity and of realization, of making things happen. We all share that, but different formats from our schools, from our education, from our religion, from our history, and so on, have kind of shrunk this awareness of our potential. And the first thing we need to do is to reactivate that awareness, and to do that through practical activities that demonstrate to a woman in Guinea, for example, that if she is able to produce improved cook stoves and train her friends and colleagues, well, she has the potential to do much more. She can change the world. Until she realizes that, until she sees us as experts that have the truth, she won't really make a difference. Once she understands that, she will make a difference, a big difference. And that's the same for you, all of us. So that's our job, and that's what ethical leadership means. Leadership is innovation, and ethics is nothing to do with morals. Ethics is just deciding that everything we do, everything you do, should improve the needs of people. My needs, his needs, your needs, everybody's needs. It happens that these needs, and a lot of research has shown that, are actually these fundamental needs. They are fundamental in the way that they are the basis, the foundation of our development as individuals and as groups. These needs are universal. Everywhere you go, be it in India or Africa or here or Latin America, we all need to feel, I mean, we've seen that, and we're discussing that at the break. We've seen that during the pandemic. We all need to feel secure. We all need to be in security, food security, employment security, physical security. We all need to be, to feel secure. We all need health. That's the reason why we're wearing masks. We all need health. But not only health, we also need balance. We need vitality, we need joy of life. Not being sick is not enough. If we want to create and change the world, we need to feel good. So that's well-being. So we need security, we need health, we need well-being, we need respect, whatever our differences. And respect of life is the subject of today. We cannot, without respecting ecosystems, without respecting all forms of life. And then we all need to be included in different circles around us, starting with the family, the village, church if you go to church, sports if you go to a football team, whatever. We need to feel included and to be included, and also need to be included in the larger view of things. As researchers, you need to know what your research is serving. Otherwise, I mean, you will not be fully balanced in your life. You need to know what all of that matters, why it matters. And then we all need access to information and knowledge. And last but not least, we need self-realization. We need to have an idea of why we came to this planet and life, and what is our role in this planet. All of these needs, however, the language, the culture, the time, the geography, we all need these. And because we all need these, we can bridge them. Your need and my need, at the end of the day, are the same. So we can, even though you don't express them, and even though you may not think it's true at the beginning. So building bridges will enable us to scale up. And that's where it comes back to ecosystems. You can start from an individual need and then gradually integrate the needs of your community and communities of communities, and that adds up to an ecosystem. That's the theory of change that Kinomé is using. So I'm now going to illustrate that in a couple of examples. The first example is mangroves. Mangroves, you all know, is a key ecosystem. You know, it's where the land meets the sea. It's where all you know, fish and shrimps and all chains, food chains start. It's essential for coastal erosion, for all kinds of climate, biodiversity, economical reasons. I would like to share a short video on what we do so that we can see images. Maybe that's the time where we can launch it. It's in French, but it's subtitled in English, so everybody can follow. I think we need Sebastian. I'm speaking. So Damien, who's our COO, he will introduce to you on this video, about 2-3 minutes, what we do. Now, we just have to find a way to, there's a way to, I think there's an option.
Maybe we can try to share by this script. So maybe this can share the sound.
Sorry, this.
To have a link, we can try directly in the.
We do have the link.
Yes, you can use the same browser and then you can sign up to collaborate. Sur le même.
Essaye 2 minutes, et si c'est pas bon, on repart à la fin.
Qu'est-ce qui s'est passé là? D'accord.
Et c'est Bastien qui s'en
Non, mais je crois qu'il est bien.
C'est pas comme ça.
Attends, excuse-moi Nathalie,
En fait, il est d'avance.
Ah, d'accord.
Je te mets dans l'ordinateur.
Et c'est pas grave, on va repartir à la fin de
Bah, sinon, on se renvoie aux études.
Je veux bien le faire.
Ah, tu l'as su. Et je sais pas, en fait, il a. C'est
Okay, thank you very much.
That's okay.
Can you check on the chat that they can now hear us?
Yeah, it's working.
Okay, so apologies. Back again. Mangroves are essential ecosystems. They need a systemic approach to their conservation and to their restoration, because as I said, a third of mangroves just in the last 20 years have disappeared. So how can we do that? We actually started from the observation that there are a lot of good projects in the field. We're talking about West Africa here, that are dealing with mangrove conservation and restoration. The problem is that there are small initiatives that are not connected to each other and very often competing for resource. When you go to a West African village, very often there is a forest not of trees but of signs, of project signs, saying I'm doing this project with that NGO, I'm doing that project with that agency, and when you talk to the local people, at times they're getting lost, if not annoyed by the fact that time after time people come to them and start a new project. So there is a need for coordination if we want to have a chance to scale up and to change the system. So we started a coalition, a group of people meeting with each other and discussing what they would like to do together and what they would not like to do together, where they feel they compete, where they feel they can collaborate and coordinate. And we talked for a year and a half until there was enough common ground between the different actors that decided they wanted to share best practice. You know, some of them are very good at raising oysters, growing oysters in the mangrove. Some of them are good at having a collective map, a mapping of this specific piece of landscape, and in organizing the use of this landscape. Some others are good at doing other things. So we started informally, without anybody paying for that, to join and share. And from that emerged the idea of having a first project together. There are 14 of us, 14 NGOs, 14, from different countries, different size. We are the social business part of it, and we coordinate. And that brought us to a first partnership with the European Union that was called Demeter, with an action research program attached to it. That was for 3 years. And 2 years ago, we started a second project of restoration, conservation, and sustainable management, still funded by the European Union through UICN. And UICN decided to work with Wetlands International and with this collective called 5 Delta. And it's called 5 Delta because it operates in 5 big river deltas of Senegal, the Gambia, and Guinea-Bissau in West Africa. And we started a project that improved the lives of people in a very, for example, just to give you a couple of examples, solar salt production, that's handled by women, organizing themselves, putting together quality control, improving access to market for salt. Same for oyster farming, going from an old practice where people actually cut the roots of the trees, of the mangrove trees, where the oysters collect and grow, cutting the roots in order to get the oysters, moving from that practice to using threads between the roots or between the trees where the oysters can actually gather. Very simple, but very efficient in terms of reducing deforestation. But that's what you see on the right-hand side of the presentation. And other things like biochar and other things that actually improve the daily lives of the women groups, bring them revenue, and contribute to reduce the pressure on the mangrove. In order to identify these activities, we don't come up and say, hey, we're going to do oyster, hey, we're going to do honey, hey, we're going to do soap. We talk to these people, start from, you know, giving them the right and the space to express themselves, start from their successes, because they have done some good things in the past, increase self-esteem, and then from there say, hey, what else would you like to do? And what would, you know, be a good way to protect these mangroves where you were born, or nearby you were born, and how could we restore them together? And that's how these, you know, these needs, these seven fundamental and universal needs emerge and translate into practical activities with practical indicators, output, outcome, and impact indicators. That in the past 2 years has enabled us to do many things, including planting 2 million trees. But you know, probably even more important are all the activities that are giving value to these trees and will make them sustain, be there in 5 or 10 years. Because there are many mangrove restoration projects. The problem is that after a few months or after a few years, in many instances, the trees are gone. For the very same reasons that they disappeared in the first place. That brought us to a more ambitious program, which is to say, okay, now we know that we can work together. We know that we can identify people's needs bottom up. We know that we have an impact on the ecosystem. How can we be even more larger scale? We work with the European Union and UICN. How can we establish an even bigger program that actually brings together the people from the 5 delta, but also from more deltas of more areas of the world? And that has brought us to think, how could we use payments for environmental services schemes in a way that really benefits to the local people? And we thought that in order to do that, we had to do 2 things. You've all heard of carbon credits, you've all heard of the good side, but also the bad side, the potentially greenwashing side. We thought the best way to avoid greenwashing is to do 2 things. One is to put human beings at the center. CO2 sequestration should be a result of the improvement of livelihoods and not the other way around. In most projects, human social factors are called co-benefits. Well, it doesn't make sense. The climate is the co-benefit. If you want something to be sustainable, you have to improve the lives of people who will, as I said earlier, will wake up at night and take their bicycle and go and extinguish the bushfire. And as a result, there will be less emissions because there will be less wood or forest burns. But it's not the other way around. It's not the will of reducing emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, that will wake people up at the night. Okay, so we apply that to carbon finance or to climate finance. This is now possible with the latest methodologies. You can still have additionality and permanence, which are the difficulties of these methodologies. Just to be a little bit technical for 1 second. So 1, put human back to the center. 2, make it a matchmaking exercise. In most projects I've come across, if somebody is rich, he can buy the carbon credits. But he doesn't have to reduce or even evaluate his or her footprint, which is not fair. I mean, people should not be allowed to offset until they have identified a footprint and done some reduction first, before they can actually offset what remains and what cannot be used or recycled or changed. So we've put together, we're actually in the process of doing that, in matchmaking, where project proponents, local NGOs, will actually enter a platform at the same time as finance partners and also scientific partners and all kinds of contributors to this project. But these people will be put together and will choose each other, so that somebody who has developed a project is guaranteed that he will not be funded by a greenwashing organization. And similarly, an organization that has done their homework will not be contributing to a project where some greenwashing organizations would have also contributed. And the way to do that is to actually put them in contact directly and to disintermediate this business. Okay, so it's using existing tools, but bringing them to, I think, where they should have started, which is the direct and measured interest of the local communities. So we are in the process of doing that, and the first project that will be on this platform is this 5 Delta mangrove project that I've just described. And more, of course, will come from different parts of the world and different types of projects. And now, switching to Yohann, who will talk to you about cocoa. They don't look at a different subject, but with the same fundamentals.
Good morning, everyone. I'm really happy to share this journey with you today. Maybe we'll have 5 additional minutes. I can do my presentation very short to save time, so we can go deeper in the Q&A session. I would like to talk about how Kinomé and partners work on a sustainable value chain. First, as you said, to save what can be saved in the forest, in the existing forest, and then restore degraded lands, degraded forest, and also maintain the incomes of people in cocoa value chain, for example, in vanilla value chains, on smaller portion of land through agroforestry, through increasing their productivity, diversification, etc., etc. One of the tools that we use in such project is agroforestry. First of all, it is important to clarify that agroforest is not a forest. It is just a way to increase the biodiversity level in farmlands, and also a way through diversification and income generation to reduce the pressure on the natural forest. And agroforestry, thanks to this diversification and also the resilience that the orchards, cocoa orchards, for example, get through agroforestry, there is a resilience to climate change, to water scarcity, etc. So it will address some of the fundamental needs that Nicolas has explained just before. In West Africa, we can say that Africa in general and West Africa in particular have a critical role in chocolate industry because of 2 countries provide 60% of world cocoa. These countries are Côte d'Ivoire, Ghana, and Cameroon are not far from these countries. So I think 5 or 6 countries provide 75% of world cocoa. But this huge production capacity of these West African countries has been based on surface extension, not in a yield increase. So it means that if you have low yields, huge production, the only way to have such production is deforestation. And many figures, many studies has demonstrated that one of the drivers of deforestation in West Africa is cocoa. But things are changing today because there is many commitments. First of all, the industry and the cocoa producers are conscious that with climate change and with the commitments that the countries, for example, Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire, are committed in the cocoa and forest initiative, these commitments includes to stop deforestation related to cocoa. So this commitment plus climate change makes people conscious that if they don't change the way they produce cocoa, it will not possible anymore to get cocoa beans from these countries because of climate change. For example, the suitable, this is a study from the CIAT, the suitable area will decrease year by year because of climate change. And as I said before, with agroforestry, you can save 2, 3, and more degrees under the canopy because the big trees will protect the cocoa. And it is important to know that a cocoa tree with more than 3 months of water scarcity will just die through desiccation. So, if you want to share, to illustrate what Nicolas said before, that the only way to scale up such technical solutions is to address the human needs. This project is developed on the ground, for example, by an NGO which is named Nitide, through a French development agency subsidized, and also some commitments of fair trade organizations. So in this project, they first start by identifying the high conservation value area to delimitate them and then to protect them with an involvement of the communities. And second, this zoning also includes an identification of the degraded forest that can be enriched by tree planting. And third, the third portion of the zoning is the cocoa growing orchards, where people can diversify and intensify. And to motivate people, the organic certification and also the fair trade certification will provide to them bonus to increase the income from cocoa. And also, sorry, that was time as well. And also, because of the needs for timber companies today, there is not more resources in the forest, so the timber companies will need more and more trees grown outside the forest. So maybe tomorrow the must forest timber trees producer will be the cocoa farmers. And today there is some arrangement, for example, between timber companies and cocoa farmers to sign contract, and then to promise that they will buy the trees after 20, 30 years, for example. Now, it was a small project, and the question is how to scale up. And here we are talking about the enabling environment. Without the commitments of the governments, the commitments of the big players of cocoa industry, Côte d'Ivoire, Ghana, and other countries cannot bring such interesting initiative to a larger scale. And here we have, for example, a commitment of the government of Côte d'Ivoire to reforest their country, to get 20% of forest cover in the next decades. And one of the driver of this reforestation initiative is the new forest code. For example, they have identified the degraded forest category 2 and category 3, which are 70% degraded and more. And only with these two types of forest in the cocoa growing region, you have something like 2 million hectares available for reforestation project, thanks to public and private partnership, and also involvement of communities, as I said before, in the forestry that will certify, etc., etc. And to accompany such initiative, you have also the involvement of the World Bank, for example, the Forest and Carbon Partnership, and Kinomé and other partners are involved in this initiative to accompany the stakeholders into technical training. For example, one of the issue is what is the good tree density in a cocoa orchard. So there will be a need of training, which kind of tree people need to plant that are compatible with cocoa. It must be bottom up also, the selection of such trees. So for example, how to develop some survey on ethnobotanical activities to understand which kind of trees people prefer because of medicinal properties of the trees, the nutrition properties of their fruits, etc., to select the suitable species and then implement. For example, also, but I will not detail all the training topics, how to aggregate the farmers in a given area into a certified value chain, how to address also land tenure issue and tree tenure issue. For those who know, in West Africa, for example, to plant a tree is a way to get the property of land. So in Eastern Côte d'Ivoire, for example, where people are locals, autochthones, they have the property of land. They don't have the same relation with trees than people in Western Côte d'Ivoire, which came later from neighboring countries. They don't have the same ability and capacity to plant faster. So you really need to understand such situation. So the idea of such training is to create, again, a platform of stakeholders that sharing the same view, the same objectives, and that will get the good tools to implement such project on the ground. And to conclude, to say that, to confirm again that such platform in sustainable cocoa, for example, but same in vanilla and same in palm oil, can work only if people really work together, and to work together they really need to be confident in their potential to change the value chain first, and also to see in the other stakeholders the same potential of changing things. It is not a question of private versus public or NGO versus private, etc. It is all the stakeholders together that make it happen. Thank you very much.
So in order to complete and to have some time of discussion, maybe we will ask you to join here and share here. Peut-être mettre la vidéo du coup. C'est là.
Whether comments on the chat.
Well. The idea is that you question between the two groups what you learn from them and what they learn from you. And if you have questions.
Je crois que vous avez des questions sur les jets avant.
Oui, mais alors on va faire.
Si un de vous est connecté.
Alain, tu avais des questions, nous les avons perdues, si tu veux les poser.
Je crois qu'il est plus là.
Erwan, tu as toujours des questions d'Alain? Non, c'est pas grave. So, do you have questions for...
Non, non, pour vous, les questions étaient perdues sur le chat.
I have questions for both groups. So the MBS you worked on was afforestation and reforestation. What you essentially talked about is agroforestry, which is not a forest, but it's tree planting. So is the MBS that we need to work on is tree planting or reforestation and afforestation? Can we diagnose what we should do? Is tree planting the same as afforestation or reforestation in terms of the targets you had to work on?
Actually, our subject was agroforestry, afforestation, and reforestation initially. But we decided to keep on studying afforestation and reforestation because it was obviously similar and different from agroforestry in terms of implementation and objectives and everything like this. So we didn't focus on agroforestry, but we did some research about it. It's true that the questions are very different. It's more human-oriented than reforestation. Often, what I've seen is that the key point in agroforestry is to get the farmers involved and to show them the interest of the agroforestry because they are directly concerned with the tree planting, maybe more than in afforestation program in land that are not occupied, for instance.
I think when we were discussing about agroforestry and afforestation, the most striking thing was that we replaced some land cover to plant more forests when we consider afforestation or reforestation. But in case of agroforestry, we actually try to incorporate new trees in the same land. So it's the species and the dynamics of the two species which are planted together. It becomes more important and more complex. And yeah, as Thibault said, I think the socio-economic aspects become more important in case of agroforestry, as we also saw in the presentation. Yeah.
I think we should start from the objectives. Actually, mangroves are forests. If the objective is to protect these forests because they are a source of food, because they are a source of drinking water, because they are protection against extreme weather events like tsunamis, that they work as a buffer against big waves. If we start from the objective, then depending on these objectives and depending on the ecosystem itself, we will go to tree planting, to pure conservation, to sustainable management, to other things. In the case of mangrove, it's a combination. It's giving more value to the standing trees so that they are not deforested. That's what we do with the oysters and the honey and everything else. It's planting new trees. That's afforestation in some instances, depending on how long there has not been any trees. The technical, but all of this is technical. The point I'm trying to make, and that's the same for cocoa, is what do we want to address? In Ivory Coast, in 1961, independence, 16 million hectares. As we speak, somewhere between 2 and 3. Guess what? Rain has changed altogether. Diseases have spread like crazy. And young farmers are actually leaving because there's no more space to deforest and start new cocoa plantations in. So we should start from what we want. In Ivory Coast, what we want is to preserve the 2 to 3 million hectares that still exist, number one. In order to do that, we need to reduce the pressure. That's what Yohann explained. That's the reason for going to agroforestry, to improve the productivity and reduce the risk for farmers so that they can live off a smaller piece of land that don't need to rotate or to go to another part of the country. And above that, we need to restore gradually in ways that are not dissimilar to what our friends showed, to restore and to build corridors between fragmented pieces of forest, so that over time they can become forests again. All of that is ecosystem protection, restoration. All of that requires all of the stakeholders to be involved, and all of that requires to fight against time, i.e. deliver improvements quickly.
I have a question, if it's it might be more to the presentation on cocoa, but I think both groups can make some comments. Because the cocoa example, we saw on the map that it spread to the country, the production, at least is what I understood by the Reforestation, the map that showed. And that, in this sense, to what point actually agroforestry is not just stopping this line of deforestation, and to which point do we need actually a forest transition? And actually, these programs are not condemning them. I think they are great. But at which point can't we start having like the problems of success? And in the sense that it will increase revenues for these families, and they will remain in the same spot where they are. And so this will it will develop for sure, and this is good for them. But at the same time, they will remain where they are, and so we will stop a possibility of reforestation and to reintegrate the forest.
Okay, thank you for the question. That is the smart part of this new forest code, because they identified at least three types of situations. The concern of the government is that in these ancient forests, they have 800,000 families of cocoa farmers. So they cannot just say, you go out and reclaim the forest. So the smart portion of the forest code is to say that, okay, where the forest is somewhere like 90% degraded, people can stay, but they must commit in trees between the cocoa trees to have a biodiversity increase, and also to be more productive, and also to decrease their sensitivity into climate change. So this is forest category 3. In forest category 1, which is something like 90% preserved, it will be 100% protected. So if there is few families in such forest, they go out and they move into a rural domain which is open to cultivation. And in between, you have the less degraded land. In between, the activity here is to really plant trees. So it is reforestation, to plant trees in this savannized area. So here they can involve timber companies, they can involve the forest ministry also, obviously, and they can also involve cocoa farmers that can commit into such activities. So to conclude, people can stay under conditions.
So you need the government and the institutions to engage, to commit as well. You need all the levels of stakeholders, starting with the communities, going to the institutions. The forest code, for example, and needs to exist and to be applied. You need the NGOs to put pressure if it isn't the case, and to offer alternatives to these people kicked out of the existing forest. You need all of these people to work together. And maybe that would be my question to you, which is, how did you see that system of human organizations work in the case study that you reviewed in China? You know, there was, of course, there was this strong government-led initiative. How did they involve the local governments and the local people, from what you could study?
I will add, because I had something to add in the previous question. It's because of
Speak loudly because.
for the afforesty, you see that the farmers are more involved. That what I think because they can still have the crops, or they can implement crops in the forest. So I guess it's less challenging to implement than the afforestation, like it's the use conversion. So and also for reforestation. So I was wondering, like you are on the field, I don't know if I said it's really the case. So that was my question from the previous, what we just said. And in the case of China, like for the Green for Green project, people was involved in it's because the government has subsidized the farmers to convert the land. Like they give them like seed for the lands that remaining in for the cropland, remaining cropland, and then they can change the other land, that the bare land or the other cropland that don't have huge productivity potential. So they have like a subsidized for that. So that's why we can see that some farmers have to change the cropland to forest, and by the time they change the land to forest, they can keep the land, the remaining land can still have the yield because the subsidized seed, also fertilizer, they can still have the same productivity in the same land. So the production didn't really change at this time because they still can have they have an increase of yield in the remaining land. So that's a really trade-off also between conservation and food security.
To your question, I think we didn't find much evidence of NGOs or human organizations being involved. But I remember one example where I discussed about water imbalances. So one of the comments in the discussions of the paper was that if they would have considered the local precipitation conditions and the local government and the people around that area, it could have been well managed. So that was one research evidence which I remember where involvement of local people could have been better, because due to the water scarcity, a lot of people were affected in that area because it's a very dry and arid region of China.
Well, you know, Chinese government can be sometimes not very talkative with international NGOs. So we know that the farmers actually did not really have the choice to leave the land for the forestry. They were given money, but it is known that it has to be a problem of a migration of people towards closer cities without consideration of sustainable other solutions, other sustainable solutions. So it seemed more like a top-down approach without local consideration than a locally discussed. I mean, like all the big projects we can observe in China. We don't have the expertise to judge that, but it is what we feel from the different papers.
Thank you. Just to do your this, I'm not sure I understood your question. Can you rephrase it?
Yes, I was wondering if agroforestry, implemented agroforestry, is less challenging because farmers don't have to change the land to grow trees, but they are involved in both. They still have the crops and also they have the trees on one land. So I was wondering if it is less challenging to have agroforestry than to afforest in an area.
Okay. Agroforestry is gradually introducing trees or more trees into crops, into agriculture. As Yohann said, it's no forestry. So it allows people to stay on their land and to reduce their risk because it introduces diversity. The problem is how you manage the transition. They call it the death valley. You know, if you reduce the number of cocoa trees to introduce timber trees for 3 to 5 years, your yield goes down because you have less trees on your cocoa plantation. So you have to manage the reduction of revenue. And very often people are very poor, especially in Ivory Coast. Most of the farmers live beyond, so they cannot afford reducing the number of trees. In that case, there has to be some kind of compensation, either in the form of microfinancing, microcredit, or improving, and that's actually the real solution, improving the price that they are given for their cocoa if they introduce these new practices. So that's coming back to payment for environmental services and also to fair trade, organic, and other certifications. And that's actually come back to all of us who have to accept that actually a reality which is that when we buy a chocolate bar or plaquette de chocolat, we don't know that it actually generates a lot of poverty, sometimes child labor, and definitely a lot of deforestation. We don't know, or we've not been told, or we don't know, or we don't want to know. Until we pay more for the chocolate that eradicates these problems with measurable, certified, traceable, follow-up of this, until we accept to pay more, we won't solve the problem. We will move the problem around. The reality is that we don't pay enough for our food, at least some of it. And of course, not everybody can afford paying more, but certainly a large part of the population, at least in France, can pay a little more to be sure that, for example, it's not full sun cocoa-only plantations. So there should be a reward, and there should be a short-term reward. That's really the point I want to emphasize today. There should be a short-term reward, because otherwise, the people who grow the cocoa, they already know how they will use the money that will come from their cocoa beans. So they will not reduce the number of trees. They will not change their practice. They cannot afford doing so until they are being given a real incentive. And I don't think microcredit is really the solution. The real solution is increased revenue through diversification and better pricing. And that involves all the consumers that we are.
Just a quick question. I don't know if it's a concern, but I know that population estimates and demography studies in this region show that there is an increasing population forecast. And so I don't know how it is implemented in the projects in building a sustainable agriculture. How is it seen by scientists and local population, and how it is managed, this potential exponential increase in population? Is it a concern in those regions where cocoa is grown?
You mean in terms of managing the projects?
In terms of so how do we anticipate the fact that eventually population will grow a lot in the next decades? Is it a factor taken into consideration?
Well, of course it is a factor taken into consideration, especially when you grow at the macro level. We work, for example, on climate change policies with some governments, Ivory Coast and Guinea and others, and this is to be taken into account. And the demography has a direct impact on the ecosystem. But the way people behave is actually even more important than the number of people. I have a family of 5 kids. Well, if we reduce the number of times we eat meat by once, from every day to twice a week or 3 times a week, it's like I was having in terms of imported deforestation, it's like I was having a family of 3. And that's true to meat, and it's true to other things.
Yeah.
So it comes back to we have if what you're getting at is can we feed the world with agroecology and organic agriculture, the answer is yes. This is demonstrated.
Yeah, but it was more.
But it requires changes in behavior, not only in agriculture, but also again in distribution, transformation, and consumption.
Yeah, sure. It was more about the idea that, for instance, nowadays 8,000 families rely on the cocoa production and the way cocoa is produced. But maybe later, maybe there is an increase in number of families who want to rely on this production. But the way it is produced now will not be will not allow more families because it's too. It's degrading too much the forest, etc. So this would require a change in the way we produce if more family will want to rely on this. I don't know if you see the.
That's what you say is exactly true.
It's not the consumption, but more the way we produce and the fact that more people maybe will rely on this kind of production that is maybe too much demanding for the environment.
If you want about that, confirm what you said. Once people diversify in their production, they will need, first of all, the first objective of the cocoa growing families, when they get money, is to send their children into schools and then into cities if they want. And second is once they diversify, they will need some workers in fruit processing plants, in timber companies. So they create, with the private sector, opportunities to employ youth. And this deforestation in Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana is an expensive model. The population density is low, so they just deforest, they plant. They don't have enough workers, so they just plant and they don't maintain, they don't take care of the farms. And the fact is that in Côte d'Ivoire, they asked people from Mali, from Burkina Faso to help them to increase the production. And you have in other countries, maybe I can refer to an old paper which the title was More People, Less Erosion, because agroforestry really works when you have 200 people per square kilometers and more, because you need to, it is a labor-intensive model in fact. So I think through diversification and agroforestry, they can create jobs and absorb the population.
I have a question concerning chocolate and cacao. I wanted to know that instead of, I think it's just a proposal that a way to help farmers to improve their income would be perhaps to bring direct industries in the countries where there are producers, so it would be easier for them to buy the cocoa at an annual price, and I think that it would be a simple way to improve maybe farmers' income. So, what do you think of this?
I think there's two different issues. There's transforming into chocolate. That requires a big investment, a big plant. That starts to be the case in Ivory Coast, for example, with Semois having a big plant in Ivory Coast. Now, most of the money remains within the company, but at least that creates jobs, and that's good for the economy of the country, maintenance and everything, and the rest of it. So that's one thing. The other thing, probably more to the point of what you're saying, is first transformation, drying and fermentation. This is where a lot of the cocoa beans are lost. And this is where a lot of the value goes in terms of the money you make. And that the more, the stronger the governance, the economics, and the agricultural practices of the cooperatives are, for example, the more chances they have to access to this kind of equipment. Most of the cooperatives, they're very much on the edge, so they don't have money even to invest in trucks to carry the beans, let alone fermentation installations, fermentation equipment. So by improving the solidity, social and economical solidity, they can get access to that, and that will increase the share of the pie, the share of the value chain, that goes to them. And that's something that we can see in Latin America, for example. But again, it all comes back to what price you buy. You know, if they get the quality and the variety, then they should be given a price that makes it worthwhile then making all that effort. And that works, but not so much, not large scale yet in Africa, hence our work and other people's.
Any other
Questions?
Hi, it's about the project you talked about, Thibault, at the beginning of your presentation, the companies that say, like, for example, for the pie we planted, it's usually very hard to know what's actually behind it, if it's even agroforestry or afforestation, etc. Do you actually know how it's monitored and what's behind it, and if it's actually helpful or harmful? These companies offering this service of one treatment.
Was it to them or to us?
I don't know.
A lot of what we do, a lot of our work is to actually audit these kind of projects. And the answer to the simple answer to your question is, if there is no sustainable benefit to the local communities, your tree will disappear. So if you pay $1 or €1 for a tree, just make sure what goes in it. If it's just seed and planting, if it's just paying people for planting, I would not go for it, because the tree will be eaten by goats or burned by the bushfire that I mentioned earlier. If out of this $1, actually $1 is probably not enough, but if out of the money that is put into the tree, there is enough to give value to the tree and also to educate the people, then the tree will survive. And another thing that you can do is to ask the people who plant trees for you, what do you do if the tree dies? Within 1 year, 2 years, 3 years? And then you will realize that, in fact, is the tree a means or an end? If it's an end, it's a short-lived end. If it's a means to a wider end, which is, again, coming back to ecosystem restoration and preservation, then it has a chance. So even without being a scientist, even without going too much into detail, you can actually sense, you know, if the meaning is just to get your tree counting machine rolling, then it's not a good sign. If it's a way to improve the local lives, then it's a good sign.
Okay.
Just to give a figure, in China, I think for a long period, only 20% of the tree were still present, like 5 years or 10 years after. Even though it was a lot of money was put into it. So it shows that maybe in other countries it's even less sometimes.
Yes.
If it's poorly managed, maybe 5 years after you lost all your plantation.
So that's where we need your science, your scientific people. That's also where we need technology. When we got to know each other with Nathalie, 10 years ago, the capacity to count the trees and to observe them from satellite pictures or radar pictures was not at all what it is now. In a very short time, you will be able to observe your trees one by one almost. So technology on this particular area helps, but again, if there is no utility to the people around the trees, they will not survive. Otherwise, they would not have disappeared in the first place again. It's very simple.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.